Cashamaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
I'm Daryl W4 with the Bad Cop and our special guest Subway Mark for episode 132 of the GeoGearHeads. This is a show for location-based tech and gamers, particularly geocachers, and tonight we'll be talking about caching from cruise ships. Before we steam into that, we have a few bits to address, so Bad Cop, let's hear about tonight's sponsor.
Daryl, I must really be rubbing off on you because that was a bad pun.
It is. I'm kind of regretting it already.
So let's move on. Tonight, we are thrilled to have Cache at Night sponsor again the GeoGearHeads. And regular listeners will know of Cache at Night and John Robb, who's been on the show several times talking about, oddly enough, night caching. Of course, they have a vast array of supplies for that, hence the name. And they're the first place I go looking for night caching supplies. There's much more, though. For those of you traveling, and this is the summer travel season, check out the AA emergency charger. It uses 4 AA batteries to charge devices like mobile phones through the USB port. You can carry it along just in case. And being that it's AA batteries, you can pull those out of your GPSR if you need to. And you always carry AA batteries with you. You can stop at the store, pick some up if you need them. Daryl, you keep one of those in your car, don't you?
Yeah, I do, and I actually toss a set of the lithium AA's in there so that it has a shelf life of about a decade. I can use it to charge up the phone in emergency, or I can pull them out and use them in the GPS if I've forgotten to bring spare batteries.
There you go. And are we even going to be using batteries in a decade? Who knows? But they'll be good for you. So head on over. You know what? Check out our show notes first. Hit the banner linking to the AA emergency charger, or just go over to cacheatnight.com. Check out that and so much more. Thanks to Cache at Night for their support of the GeoGearHeads.
Our thanks also to our patrons. The 21 GeoGearHeads who have contributed through Patreon are the ones who help keep this show coming and underwriting those continuing costs of the show, including the expenses like mailing out the prizes to the lucky winners. We get the prizes for these shows donated, but we still have to cover the expenses of the delivery. As a thank you to our patrons, they get a bunch of bonus content, including extra audio, host favorites, and hangouts. If you're a patron, you should already have received your invite to the July and August hangouts. The July hangout is coming up this Sunday. The August one will be interesting as the Bad Cop will be joining us from the block party, I think.
I certainly hope to, and I always love these hangouts. So thanks again to the patrons. But we have even more people waiting for the answer to this week's question. And for that, let's welcome back the man who has nothing to do with sandwiches, Subway Mark.
Hey there. Hey, it's great to be back. And this question was definitely directed at me since this is all going to be about my cruise through the Panama Canal. And heck, that's the answer. So congrats to CyberGeek for being drawn as the winner for this week's 180-day membership to Project GC.
Well, and thank you to Project-GC for donating that prize. We'll have another question at the end of this episode for yet another prize pack from GX Proxy to be given away on next week's show, so stay tuned. But we want to know a little bit more about this trip you took, Mark.
Sure. So in March was my wife and I's 25th wedding anniversary, so we decided to do something really special. And so we planned a whole 3-week vacation. The first week was to Walt Disney World, and then 2 weeks were on a cruise ship through the Panama Canal.
Wow.
And, yeah, it was over those 3 weeks, 17 caches I found, which is not much, but 5 new countries added to the cache map. That is awesome.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
And I need to say congratulations for 25 years of marriage.
Oh, thank you.
The average marriage in America lasts, what, about 9 months? So I think you finally beat the odds.
I think I beat the odds. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get off the cruise ship to do those caches. So 17 in 3 weeks is probably a lot more substantial than people realize.
Yeah, because we only stopped in 5 ports, and you don't have a lot of time in these ports, so it is kind of difficult to do it.
Well, and you spent 1 week at Walt Disney World where there'll be 0 caches.
Well, there's a couple of virtuals
You're
around
right.
there.
There are a couple of virtuals at Disney World.
Yeah, Disney World, I think each park has one virtual, and then there's a couple of others in a couple of different locations around the grounds. So I take it that you had a chance to do some of those?
Yeah, I've been to Disney World before and got a couple previously, but Epcot has 2 virtuals, so I got both of those, which is kind of awesome. And then Magic Kingdom, I hadn't gotten there, so it was awesome to do that as well.
Great. Now, tell us a little bit about what you had to do for the planning of this trip.
Yeah, so there's a lot of places to look at and stop at. So I use GSAC a lot, and obviously Pocket Queries. So my first thing is I did Pocket Queries for Florida for Disney World, and then for the drive down to Fort Lauderdale, which was the port we were going out of. Then I did a PQ for the entire country of Panama because we were actually doing a trip, a shore excursion across the entire isthmus of Panama there to Panama City from Cologne. And then did another one from San Diego because that's the other port. But when it came to the other ports of call, instead of doing a pocket query for each port, I just used GSAC, and it has a feature where you can just go to a certain location and then just pull caches manually that way through the API, which that kind of worked out really well for me. And I refreshed it, like the day before our boat was leaving, just to make sure I had the latest and greatest information. Because you don't really want you don't want to go there and find out the cache went missing the day before.
Sure, and I'm sure you did a little bit about filtering from there too. But before we get into that, if you're pulling these from GSAC, I'm assuming you're going to load them onto a traditional, like, dedicated outdoor GPS type unit.
Yeah, I did too. I did my GPS Map 62, and also I put it on to my iPhone for offline caching. So I had a backup just in case, which proved worth it later.
I'm sure there's a story there, but let's get back into the selection of these caches. I'm assuming with Panama, there's not that many caches, but also in order to get all those caches for Panama, you still had to do some kind of filtering on that, and you probably would want to anyway.
Right. So to make my life easier, I only pulled caches that are traditionals, virtuals, earth caches, and letterboxes. So basically virtuals and then some physicals, easy physicals. I didn't want to do multi-caches. Didn't really want to look for puzzles unless I pre-solved them and stuff like that. So I did that, and then I wasn't going to have time to do any sort of major hiking, or didn't really want to spend a lot of time looking. So I filtered the terrain levels down to 2.5 or less, and difficulty of 3.5 or less.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you have limited time to go after these things. So how much time did you have in Panama to go after a cache?
So in Panama, we docked in Cologne, and then we took what later turned out to be a very personalized tour. We had booked a tour that was supposed to be with a group, but it turned out no one else showed up except for me and my wife. So this guy just loaded us in his taxi cab, and we drove over to Panama City. We had 9 hours in Panama. Now, most of it was touring, but we were on top of a hill, Acon Hill, which overlooks the city as well as the canal. And I left the GPS in the taxi while walking around, and I realized, wait, this is a park. There should be a cache here. But I pulled out my phone, and my phone had the offline caches. Like, oh yeah, 150 feet. There you go.
Caches are everywhere.
That was awesome. And then going through the Panama Canal, there's a virtual at one of the locks that if you're on a cruise ship, it's the best way to get that virtual.
Excellent. Now, we actually do have something here in the live Q&A that I think is a kind of interesting way to get a cache if I'm reading the event correctly. And this comes from Wet Coaster, who said, late last month, there was an event in Vancouver, BC, connected to cruising, GC56G1C, Alaska Geocaching Cruise, Adventure Meet and Greet, and he wants to know if those are common. He might have a little bit better knowledge of that than I do, and even you guys probably do because you're in more cruise territory than I am. There's not much cruising going on out of Detroit, but
You
it
could cruise the
basically.
Great Lakes.
Well, there are some Great Lakes cruises, but they're like little day excursion type of things usually, and that gets into a whole different thing. There actually used to be kind of like river cruises in Europe. They actually used to do Great Lake cruises where it was multi-week adventures and things like that. But getting back to this one, it sounds like this is basically a couple of the cruisers who had scheduled events, so when they were at port, they could have a little meet and greet either before or after their cruise.
Yeah, so that's relatively common, and so when we were going to Guatemala, there was no caches near the port or near where we were going in the Mayan ruins. So, but I really wanted to get Guatemala as a country, so I created an event at the port in Guatemala as a meet and greet, and it got published no problem. And I also, what I did is on the information desk on the board ship, I even put a notice, hey, there's going to be a meet and greet for geocachers at the Guatemala port at this time, and it worked out perfectly. I set it up so it would be about 1 hour before the boat was supposed to leave dock. We got to the port, got back from a shore excursion. We kind of hung out where I set the cords right at the dock, and two cachers did wind up showing up there, and so we had a meet and greet. They were on the boat, and also afterwards, on the note, I said, hey, if anyone wants to meet up in one of the lounges afterwards, while we're still at least in the territory of Guatemala, so you could claim the event, well, we can meet at the lounge. And 2 other cashers showed up at the lounge. So we basically had six people showed up in total between myself and my wife and all these others. So it does work out. Now, I did get an email, though, from another cacher who was going on a cruise about 3 weeks after this and asked me to archive my event pretty quickly in Guatemala because she was getting rumblings that potentially some reviewers may not like having events at cruise ship ports because locals cannot always go to their ports because they're secured. So some reviewers may not like that. So
Interesting.
Never considered that. Yeah.
So she was asking me to archive it because she was afraid if she was going to put the event at the same location that someone might flag it. Oh, there's something going on here. So I did archive it as soon as everyone logged it, which was about a week later.
Well, you can actually still archive it and have people log it.
Yeah.
I've done that for some of my events just because I know that I'm going to forget about it. So, when I get home from the event, I archive the event, and people can still log it because, they don't lock the event unless they see a whole lot of activity that they think is out of the ordinary, they being, groundspeak.
Right. Well, I made sure everyone had the GC code just in case I archived it faster than they got to log it.
So
right.
Mark,
Well, I would think one of the problems with archiving for you was that you were on the ship, and as we kind of mentioned in some of the previous shows, internet access from cruise ships is not really affordable.
No, it's expensive. So, like in most ports have Wi-Fi, either free or quote free. It's in a restaurant, so you have to buy something. So, like in Costa Rica, my wife and we bought ice cream because it was hot. And if you bought ice cream, you got the Wi-Fi code to get on the internet. And then in Puerto Vallarta, there was a bar right there at the port, and again, you buy a beer, you get the code. So
Sounds like a good trade-off.
It's a good trade-off. It's better than paying, $10 a minute or whatever it is on board the cruise ship. It's just obscene,
Exactly. So, are you telling me there were 4 other geocachers on the cruise with you?
There were at least, actually, there were more. And when we were on board ship, we would go to lunch in the main dining room, which was open dining, and we would start talking about geocaching. So I think we converted 2 muggles into geocachers. And one of the other geocachers, I only noticed that he was a geocacher when I saw his GPS he was putting back in his backpack. It's like, you're a geocacher, aren't you? So,
Nice.
and then when I was geocaching around the ports, I ran into the same cachers every time. There was at least 8 people on board ship that were geocachers.
Interesting. And you didn't plan any of this. It was just coincidence.
It's just all coincidence.
Nice. So, are you going to change your name to Cruise Ship Mark after this?
No.
No, okay. You're still going with the subways. I was just checking.
Still Subway.
Okay. So
Yeah, but it's so hard to get a GPS signal in the subway.
yeah, that's true. Well,
It's true.
it's easier than getting internet on a ship.
It's cheaper.
Well, I don't know about that. Yeah.
So, Mark, tell us a little bit of how this trip went for you.
The trip went rather well. Like, the weather worked out pretty well. I found a cache in every port, which was the important part. That was, Mexico. I found more than one in every port, but as soon as you get one in a country, that's all you actually need.
Mhm.
So I would relax after I found that first cache. That first cache.
I know
But until you get that
exactly what
first
you mean.
cache, like, I want that country.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're doing what we always do for those travels where we're trying to grab every state that we possibly can or grab that country. Is you plan out for the primary and a backup cache.
Exactly. That's what I had to do. And even though some of the shore excursions we did go on, like in Cartagena, Colombia, there were two caches right along the tour that we were taking, the walking tour, but we were moving so fast, it's like I can't even break away from the group. They'll miss me for 5 minutes because I don't want to miss my bus back to the boat.
No, that would be bad.
That would be really
Yeah,
bad.
and you don't have the data on the phone, so it's not like your wife could stay with the group and you could track her through something like Glimpse, because, well, again, you don't have the data service in that country, and if you did, it would be really expensive.
It's horrendously expensive, exactly. But the other tip I learned, though, again in Cartagena, is there is a cache right at the cruise ship terminal, but the cords on the website are totally off by at least 500 feet. I mean, it's pretty far. But if you go through the caching logs, you see a few logs. Oh, here's the real cords. So the cache owners never updated them, but at least you can go through the logs, and it was right there by the ship. I mean, it couldn't be any. It was only like 200 feet from where the ship docked. It was just really close.
Nice. And we've talked on previous shows, Daryl, about putting those kind of caches out for visitors so they can get a state if it's a rest stop, or in this case, an entire country, putting it near a cruise ship or perhaps a hotel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're definitely big fans of that. Before we move on to maybe some of the things that didn't go so well, what about any highlights in the cache finds?
That's a good question. So,
I think I know what my answer would be. Being that I like virtual so much.
yeah, the virtual through Panama Canal right at Gatun Locks is pretty awesome. It's knowing you're on the ship. The only requirement, you had to take a photo of yourself, a selfie basically in front of the control tower there. But it was definitely awesome sight there.
Yeah, I was going to say that would probably have been my favorite just because it's a virtual.
And then probably my favorite traditional was the one on top of Acon Hill, which overlooked the city as well as the canal. So that was just beautiful up there.
Oh, yeah, that's another one of those where a cache can take you to a wonderful scenic location.
Exactly.
So, what did not go so well necessarily that you would like to change if you had the opportunity?
Well, one thing, it wasn't really on the cruise. It was actually driving from Orlando down to Fort Lauderdale via Cocoa Beach, and I had a travel bug that wanted to go to a specific cache in a wildlife preserve, and I had stopped at a relative's house before, so it was getting really late and it was getting dark, and here I am in Florida at a wildlife preserve, and it's pitch black. I had a small flashlight trying to find this cache, walking down this dark path, and things are moving, and I'm thinking, let's see, there's snakes, there's alligators, and it's a wildlife preserve. I kind of freaked myself out. So the bad part is I didn't have a secondary cache in mind of where I could drop this travel bug, because I really want to be within a circle of this area. So, and then I drove around. I did have some other caches loaded, but one that said it was a regular. I go to find it. It was a tiny one, so there's no way I could fit the travel bug. I wound up driving 50 miles before I was finally got off the freeway, and there's a large here. I gotta stop and drop this travel bug off and go.
Oh, man.
So, Mark, you still have all your toes?
Yes.
Oh, then it was fine. Count that as a win.
My wife, I got back in the car, my wife's like, why are you hyperventilating?
No, I'd be right there with you. You know, you're in an unfamiliar area. You know there's wildlife, and it's dark, and you hear movement. I think I'd be right there with you.
Exactly.
But you know the locals are probably so used to it that it doesn't even faze them. Kind of like, if we were just walking down the trail and heard, birds in the trees.
Mm-hmm.
True. But it had to be snakes. That's all I can say.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Snakes on the trail.
Exactly.
All right, I do have to wonder a little bit, and this just came to me as we were talking about this cruise. Since your port of origin and your destination were both in the U.S., but you had to go through all of these other ports, what were customs like going through there?
So when you have to have a passport on you, and you have your cruise ship ID, so that there is no real customs check other than when you get on and off the ship. They check you in and they check you out, and you better not be trying to sneak some alcohol on board ship, because they do X-ray everything that's coming back on board ship. They'll confiscate. They'll hold it for you, but you can't bring it on board, mainly because they want you to buy the alcohol on board ship.
Yeah, I'm sure that's probably the case, but no problems with any of the electronics or anything like that.
No. I mean, I had my cameras slung over me and GPSs, and no one ever stopped me or anything like that. So.
No, yeah, I kind of wouldn't expect too much trouble, though. Yeah, some people are a little bit curious why you need a GPS when you're a tourist.
True. I didn't really feel that so much on this cruise. I've had that in foreign countries more than I ever do it on this cruise. Mexico, no one seemed to bother. Costa Rica, I was in the port but there were other caches with their GPSs out, so no one paid any attention.
Well,
yeah, and it sounds like it's not uncommon.
You needed to get back to the ship. That's
always the excuse. That's always the excuse.
Well, you did mention though that
me to go buy a new GPS. I have to get back home somehow.
It's true.
Now, you did mention that you had to use the iPhone as a backup at some point. What's that whole story?
Well, that was mainly because I left it in the car, but I've also had it in the past where my GPS had freaked out, and everything was loaded, and I turn it on, and there's no maps, no nothing. It just locked up. It seems like the GPS that my Garmin does this every so often, and then I have to do a factory reset. But it had lost the maps in this factory reset somehow, which never did before. And being in a foreign country with no maps kind of freaks me out a little bit. I like having my maps.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
For the maps on the iPhone, what did you do there since you didn't have data service?
So it's my work phone, and I turned on the data for 30 seconds and turned it back off. Nobody knows.
Don't worry, nobody listens to this podcast. You're fine.
Exactly.
You were just checking your work email, that's all.
And I did. It download the email real quick. There you go, done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I know if you select caches in the official geocaching app, you can download a small map. A map tile comes along with it. So, actually, if you get close enough, there's a map tile that will get you, in the right direction. And really, I've used that in the past, and it's not bad.
Sure, and most of the third-party apps have some type of connection, or automated way, or not so automated way of getting the offline maps in there. We've talked about that a little bit before, and we're going to talk about a lot more later on, because we do have a show on offline caching coming up in the not-so-distant future.
That show will be available online.
And I do use Geosphere as my offline app, basically, and I've been known to go on the wireless at the hotel just before I go out, and it'll cache that map of the area at least.
Yeah. We do have a tip coming in from Wet Coaster again through the live Q&A. He says it helps to make a list of the cameras and, quote, big ticket items you are taking out of the country, so you don't have to have an issue with them when you get back home. And that's actually something that's very true. And at least for those of us here in the U.S., you can go to the customs office, and there's a special form that you can fill out with all of your equipment serial numbers and everything. You have to actually have the equipment with you. But if you have a lot of camera gear, like my friends and I do, this is something that you want to do. Go to the office with all that gear, let them certify it, because otherwise they have tried to charge, especially like photographers, tax on some of that gear coming back. And you know how expensive some of that gear is, and if they're going to charge you tax on that list price, you probably just blew your vacation budget.
Yeah, knock on wood, I've never had that happen.
That's a really good tip, Daryl.
Yeah, it is a good tip.
And thank you, Wet Coaster. So, Mark, looking at itinerary, we talked about Cartagena, Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
You found one cache there. Colon, Panama.
Yep.
That's actually in the... Of course, the Panama Canal itself. Now, how long did it take you to go through the Panama Canal?
So the ship entered the breakwater at the mouth of at the Caribbean side at 6 in the morning, and we were crossing underneath the America's Bridge on the Pacific side at 6 p.m. So 12 hours to transit. It's a long day, and I have a step counter. I walked 5 miles on board ship that whole day because I kept walking around, getting photos, and just going crazy with it.
That was my next question. Did you, were you on deck the whole time during the passage through the locks?
About 80% of the time, and through the Gatun Lake, 80% of the time I was on deck, either lower or upper deck. It's just awesome.
Nice.
Now, here's kind of an overall question. You haven't hit many caches along this route, but is this a cruise that you would recommend for geocachers? And if so, what type of geocachers?
Since it hit 5 countries, if you want to add 5 countries to your map, that's kind of an awesome way to do it. I mean, it takes 15 days to do this kind of cruise, but you get to see some really neat topography. I mean, Costa Rica is a beautiful country, Guatemala, the Mayan ruins, and you get to do geocaching. So I mean, it's kind of crossing everything. So if you like history, if you like scenery, and you like geocaching, I would recommend this in a heartbeat.
Yeah, so pretty much everyone aside from like power caching?
Pretty much. Power cachers would not like this cruise whatsoever.
Unless you consider 5 countries in a trip power caching, because that's pretty good.
That is true.
Yeah, but you'd have to speed up the ship somehow. Maybe they have like a hydroplane ship or something that you could do.
I'll tell you a quick story. Okay, on my honeymoon, went on a cruise. As we were leaving port, the ship sucked up a plastic bag into the cold water intake and shut down one of the engines.
Ooh.
We were standing out on deck, and I'm looking at it as we're leaving the waterway, with the earthen sides there. I'm looking at it going, why is the ship sideways in that? And we ran aground. We had a cabin with a window on the dock side. And when we left, there were big burly men there untying us. When we got back, there were executives in suits tying us up. So I saw the captain walking off with one of the executives, put his arm around the shoulder, and I could just see, and you did what with my ship?
Exactly.
So, we missed a day. All that to say, they put that ship into overdrive. And we missed one island and, shot straight on. But, that ship you could feel the engines working hard. The whole ship was vibrating just a little bit.
Wow.
So they're not designed to go that fast.
No, most of the ships do have a lot more power than they put on for regular cruising, and it gets a lot more expensive as they push that up, too. So they don't need to do that.
Yeah, the top speed our boat, it was 22 knots at one point, and its top speed is 26, but that's pretty fast. They don't really like going above 18 if they could avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and the faster you go, that's the more risk of a less comfortable ride for the passengers, and unless you're in choppy seas or something like that.
Yeah, we did have one. We had 2 different days that was really choppy seas, and that's also the days they were hauling too. It's like, people were not having fun, and we watched a stage show, and we wait for the dancers to fall over.
Did they?
No, they said they're actually, if they stay on the balls of their feet, they're fine. If they go flat-footed, that's when they fall.
So they have their sea legs.
Exactly.
Now, we need to talk about 2 more countries before we get too far off topic. You also stopped in, I hope I say it right, Punta Arenas, Costa Rica?
Punta Arenas, Costa Rica. There we had a shore excursion, and the shore excursion was running late because the boat got in late. And I wish it was on time because we went to this alligator boat tour, and there was a cache, less than a tenth of a mile away from where the boats were, but because we're so late, they were rushing us so fast, like, but it's right there, it's right there. And then there was a cache right at the foot of the dock, and there was 5 of us looking for this cache, and the cache, we know exactly where the cache should be, but it looks like it definitely went missing. We all did contact the cache owner, and he permitted logging it because we said exactly where it should be, and he said, well, it looks like it's missing again.
Oh, yeah, sounds like one that should be archived then.
Yeah, I think so. It should be.
Well,
archived.
That was really nice of him to let you find it. I've found caches that way too. Hey, I just want to let you know the cache is missing. He goes, you're at the spot, so claim it. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that gets into a whole other thing about your personal ethics. Do you claim a log if the cache owner says that you can find it or not? And my reaction is a lot of the time, I don't do that because I want to go back and find it. If the cache owner is going to archive the cache, then I'll usually do it.
But if you're at the spot, and for instance, I've found one where the Velcro was still attached to wherever, but the cache itself was gone. So I found where it was.
Oh yeah, and I found ones that are like hooks in trees and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and there's one more proviso on that too. If it's someplace that I can go back to, then I won't log it. But if it's someplace that I can't get back to easily, like a vacation cache, then I'm more likely to log it as well.
Yep, and that was the case for me. So.
Yeah.
And 2 other caches did the same.
So also one more cache in Guatemala.
Guatemala was actually the event because there was no caches near the port. So we did go to the Mayan ruins, but there was no caches anywhere near there.
Yeah, and there probably shouldn't be aside from something like a virtual cache. And Groundspeak, please bring back the virtuals.
Exactly.
Well,
please.
The Earth caches probably wouldn't fit so well with the Mayan ruins, especially with them cracking down a little bit on what constitutes an Earth cache.
That's true. And the Mayans were so ahead of their time. They didn't think of putting a cache there.
I know. I was shocked.
Yeah.
Silly people.
The problem was they still had no internet service to actually do the listing. So without that, they really couldn't do the geocache.
They could have carved it on stone tablets and waited for us to find it thousands of years later. So there really is no excuse here, Daryl.
Well, no, I think they prepped the site for the cache.
Okay.
There you go.
They just weren't able to place it and list it. So that was the whole problem, is that they just didn't have enough time before,
They probably placed it. It's just been muggled, 10,000 years ago.
They ran out
with the rest of their, interesting artifacts.
Well, the problem is their calendar ran out and they didn't know what to do.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, man, the bad puns just keep on rolling. All right, so we do have more questions from Wet Coaster. Actually, this is more feedback. And his wife and he are going to be going on a European river cruise next April. They're going to be hitting Switzerland, Germany, France, and Luxembourg. He says he's going to be preloading his GPS for sure, and it does include 2 days in Paris. So any tips that maybe you can pass on to him for things that he should look out for? I know it's a lot different, but he is going through a lot of countries there. Mark, I think you might be muted or something because we're not catching you. No.
Well, my thinking is when you're in Paris, don't try to speak French, because that confuses them more than if you have really bad French, or even English. So speak English; they'll pick up.
Can you hear me
Yeah.
now?
Now we
there's
can
one.
hear you.
Awesome. I figured out what happened. No, so Paris has some great earth caches too, though. I mean, you really need to look for earth caches in the city. It's kind of awesome.
Interesting. I never really thought about earth caches in a city like Paris, but it does make some sense.
Yeah, there's one at one of the big squares. That's because the obelisk has some really ancient stone into it, so you really need to do that.
Yeah, there are some Roman ruins within the city of Paris.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to the comments about the virtual caches needing to come back, Native Texan has exactly the same idea a lot of us have had, saying that there needs to be a historical cache type like a virtual where you can't put a traditional. And I totally agree, something kind of along the lines of earth caches. And this is something, I think, Chris, you and I have talked about it several times, and I know I've talked about it on geocaching podcast several times. I really want something set up very much like earth caching for historic locations, but the real problem is, what organization would you tie into for that?
Right, you need a moderated body to control what caches are released in a historical context.
And who defines that? That's the problem.
Right.
It's my cache, I define it.
Exactly.
Oh, wait, that's not what we're going for, is it? But that's what we'll end up with.
You're right, and that's why they need to have it not necessarily moderated. Maybe jurred is probably a better term for it, so that you can validate that there's some historical context there, and something like what's the name of that app? Field Trip does a very good job of providing those kind of locations and giving you some background through multiple different services. And that's the thing. If you start looking at those historical locations through apps like Field Trip, and there's a few others that were doing the same kind of thing, you're looking at multiple sources aggregated through that app. There's not one single app that does that. And Wet Coaster totally agrees with us about the historical. The rules would really be hard to come up with, but Native Texan does think that any historical society would be a good tie. And again, the problem is you'd have to, if you're just going for something like historical society, you'd probably have to tie that in to some kind of regional thing. Like maybe it would be state by state, but boy, would that be tough to deal with.
Yep, it would be.
It would be. Mm-hmm.
And her next comment here is, if there's an official marker for something, then it's a given. Well, yeah, that's definitely true, but again, which marker and how do you verify that the marker is actually there and all that kind of stuff? Most of the state markers and federal markers here in the U.S., and I think Canada has a couple of websites as well that I've seen with the markers. Yeah, Sharpie markers. But yeah, some kind of index, and that you could do, but that doesn't take me to the cool ones that I'd really like to see. The ones that are the hidden treasures, the ones that you don't normally find out about through something like those official markers.
Mm-hmm.
I got one other tip for Wet Coaster.
Yes, let's get back to it.
So the other thing I do is, so on my Garmin, I download OpenStreetMaps for every country I go to, so I don't have to buy maps, and that works out. Especially in European cities, you really want to have the maps so you don't get lost yourself, not just to find geocaches, but just to get around. So I always make sure I have OpenStreetMaps, the latest grid boxes loaded down. You can grab them off. There's a wiki for it that has links on where to go to download them all.
That's a really good tip.
Yeah, and I do like the OpenStreetMaps, especially for areas outside of the traditional home regions for the GPS manufacturers, because they seem to be updated more often and have more of the walking trails marked, and that's
Yep.
one of the things that you don't find as often on the commercial maps is those walking trails.
Exactly. Yep.
And
So-
when you're in a city or something, you're going to want to be doing a lot of that.
Exactly.
So, Mark, did you take a laptop along with you? We know you had your GPS and a smartphone, or two.
Yes, I did take my laptop with me. So when I got to some of the ports, I could check on status, and then if something happened and I'd lost everything on my GPS, I could re-download it if I wanted to.
I was going to say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you were already having problems. I don't think I'd want to go without at least 2 GPSs or the laptop to make sure that you could bring it back with the firmware downloaded to the laptop so that you could make that connection and do that.
Exactly.
All right. We are running toward the end of our show here, but I'd love to sit down and talk with you a little bit more afterward, maybe do a patron special.
Sure, no problem.
Excellent. And before we do let you go, we have a couple of more comments. One from John, who says that he would like to do the historical markers like they do benchmarks. And my take on that is if they do, no one would do them. Just like the same kind of... Yeah, just like benchmarks, but also like we've seen with the waymarks and we've seen with the challenge caches, or geocaching challenges, rather. You know, if it doesn't count toward the bottom line of caching, a lot of cachers just ignore them, so that's one of those problems. But Native Texan says we need to all do a cruise to discuss this further.
I hear you.
So Native Texan, you want to organize that and take care of all of the financial aspects for it, and we'll be happy to show up.
She'd
be
love
there.
to do that.
I'm sure she would.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for joining us. And if you're a patron, make sure to check out the Patreon feed because we're going to have another show coming up. But that's going to do it for this week.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So don't forget to email the GeoGearHeads at cachemaniacs.com, or you can call in 206-350-3647. We have a lot of shows in the feed coming up. Daryl does an excellent job of scheduling these. So if you have comments on any of these, please use the methods I just mentioned. Now, next week we're talking about the gear that we use. We're talking about our gear. July 24th is Randomized 25. That was confusing, Daryl. July 31st, Mega Event Planning #1. You're really going to want to listen to that one. August 7th, we're talking road caching. This is episode number 5 on road caching. We've been doing a great job on that one. And August 14th, we're talking with the infamous, or shall I say infamous, geocaching doc.
So definitely a whole bunch of good shows there. Lots of stuff for you to check in with us and give us your feedback. And actually, our question for this week has something to do directly with our gear #2, because one of the requests had been to kind of look back at what we had done in our early days of caching. So let's get into that question for next week's show and get your emails ready to geogearheads at cachemaniacs.com. This time, we want to know with which device you started your caching. Tell us if you started with your iPhone 3G, your Nuvi 350, TomTom 1, eTrex Yellow, or whatever that might have been. We'll need that email titled Question 133 with your geocaching device and geocaching.com screen name in the body. That has to be received at geogearheads at cachemaniacs.com by 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on July 16th for your chance to win that prize pack from GX Proxy.
So check the Cachemaniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes from this and all our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647 or by emailing geogearheads at cachemaniacs.com, or I'm not done yet, through social media. Your support helps keep the Cachemaniac shows coming, so please consider becoming a patron or making a PayPal donation through the link on our website to support these Cachemaniac shows. Thank you, Cache at Night, for your financial support of this episode. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Umfenauer and Daryl Wattenberg. This show is copyright 2014 by Daryl Wattenberg, all rights reserved.